The chandeliers sparkled above the grand ballroom, casting light on a sea of silk gowns and polished shoes. Yet the only sound that seemed to matter was the measured voice of Richard Grant, cutting through the murmurs. "Son, tonight you will choose your future wife from the finest women in this city, and you will choose wisely for the sake of our family name and our company." All eyes turned to Alexander Grant, the man everyone believed was the perfect heir to the Grant fortune. Tall, sharp-suited with an expression carved from ice, he stood beside his father, surveying the line of socialites. Their smiles rehearsed, their pedigrees whispered into every ear present. Cameras from discreetly invited society reporters clicked softly like the ticking of an expensive clock, marking the moment history would turn. But Alexander was not looking at them. Across the room near the corner, a young woman knelt on the marble floor, gathering shards of crystal into her hands. Her uniform was plain, her hair pulled back, her fingers wet from spilled champagne. Maya Torres had been invisible until now, just another worker in the vast Grant estate. She did not glance up even when a sharp-voiced guest scolded her for interrupting the perfect view. Alexander's gaze fixed on her as if nothing else existed. Then, without warning, he stepped away from his father, walked past the glittering row of eligible brides, and stopped before the maid whose eyes finally met his. The room went silent. "I choose her." Gasps rippled through the ballroom as if the very air had been knocked out of every guest. Richard Grant's face tightened into a mask that betrayed nothing, yet his eyes burned with disbelief and fury. "You choose her," he said, his voice low, but heavy enough to still the whispers. Alexander kept his gaze steady on Maya, who was frozen in place, holding the pieces of broken glass in trembling hands. "Yes, I choose her," he replied with deliberate calm. Maya's mouth opened, as if to protest, but no words came. She had been working at the Grant estate for barely 3 weeks, hired through an agency to help with the extra load of the season. She had no idea who Alexander truly was until tonight, when she overheard guests mentioning his return from Europe and his reputation for being cold, calculated, and entirely focused on the family empire. Now he was standing in front of her, making a choice that made no sense at all. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat awkwardly, as if searching for a way to smooth over the situation. But the tension was too thick to cut. Several socialites shifted uncomfortably, some narrowing their eyes at Maya with thinly veiled contempt. One in particular, Isabella Price, adjusted her diamond necklace and offered a small, brittle smile toward Richard, as if to remind him that she was still the obvious choice. Richard raised a hand and signaled for the music to stop. "This is not the time for games, Alexander. These women have been carefully selected for their standing, their background, and their potential to strengthen our legacy." "That girl," he nodded sharply toward Maya, "is a staff member. She does not belong here." Maya straightened slightly, despite the heat rushing to her face. "Sir, I am very sorry. I did not mean to interrupt. I was just cleaning up after an accident," she said quietly, hoping to retreat. Before more eyes could sear into her, Alexander's voice cut through her words. "You did nothing wrong." Then turning to his father, he added, "I am not here to strengthen an image, built on alliances, I am here to decide my own future." His words did nothing to soothe Richard's temper. He dismissed the guests early, ignoring their disappointed murmurs, and ordered the staff to clear the room. Maya was pulled aside by Mrs. Turner, the head housekeeper, who hissed, "What on earth happened out there? Do you realize who you were speaking to?" Maya shook her head, still dazed. Mrs. Turner's eyes widened. That was Alexander Grant, the only son of Mr. Richard Grant, and the man who will inherit everything if he does what his father wants. Maya almost laughed at the absurdity. Why would someone like that point at me in front of the entire city? She slipped away to the staff quarters, hoping to finish her shift quietly. But before she could clock out, Mrs. De Turner reappeared, flustered. "Mr. Grant wants to see you." "Which one?" Maya asked warily. "The younger one." Maya followed her through the long, polished hallways until they reached a private study lined with dark wood and shelves of books that smelled faintly of cedar. Alexander was standing by the window, looking out into the gardens, lit by soft golden lamps. He turned when she entered and gestured for her to sit. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his tone softer than before. Maya sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You do not owe me anything, sir. What happened out there? I am sure it was a mistake." "It was not. I needed to make a statement, and you happened to be the only person in that room who looked like they were being themselves." Maya blinked. "I was cleaning up broken glass." "Exactly," he said with a small smile. "Everyone else was pretending to be perfect." She shook her head, unsure whether to be flattered or offended. "What happens now?" "I go back to my life and you pick someone suitable," Maya said carefully. "Not exactly. My father will insist that I spend the next 2 weeks with the woman I choose to see if she is truly fit for the role. I would like you to agree to this arrangement." Maya stared at him, stunned. "You want me to pretend to be your potential fiancé for 2 weeks?" "Yes. You will be compensated generously, and when it is over, you can walk away." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "And why would I do that? Because you need the money, and I need someone who will not play my father's game." Maya's eyes narrowed. "How do you know what I need?" Alexander hesitated, then said, "I did some background checks before I came home. I know about your mother's illness and the hospital bills." Maya's chest tightened with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "That is personal. I know, and I am sorry, but it means I can help you." "This is business to you," she said flatly. "At first, maybe. But if you agree, you will have a roof over your head for 2 weeks, food security, and more than enough money to pay for your mother's treatment." Maya looked away, her mind racing. 2 weeks in this mansion, pretending to be the girlfriend of a man she barely knew, all under the scrutiny of a powerful and judgmental family. It sounded impossible. Yet the thought of her mother's tired smile pushed through her hesitation. 2 weeks, she repeated quietly. "That is all." Alexander nodded once. "Then we have a deal." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the east wing where Alexander had arranged a guest suite for Maya. She woke to the unfamiliar scent of fresh linen and the quiet hum of the estate, far different from the cramped apartment she shared with her mother. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was, until she noticed the wardrobe stocked with dresses in muted, elegant colors clearly chosen for her to wear during her stay. A knock came at the door, followed by Mrs. Turner, who handed her a schedule printed on thick cream paper. "Mr. Grant thought you might prefer to know the day's plans," she said in her brisk but not unkind manner. Maya scanned the list: breakfast with Alexander at 8, a tour of the gardens at 10, lunch at the clubhouse at 1, and a charity meeting in the evening. This is a lot for someone who usually spends her mornings scrubbing floors, she thought, but she kept the comment to herself. At breakfast, Alexander was already seated at the long mahogany table, a pot of coffee steaming beside him. He looked up as she approached and gave a slight smile. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" She nodded, taking a seat at the opposite end. "Better than I expected." He poured coffee into her cup without asking and slid a plate toward her. Waffles golden crisp, topped with berries, and a drizzle of syrup. She hesitated. "I thought this was more of a dinner table thing." He shrugged. "It is the only thing I can cook without burning down the kitchen." She took a cautious bite and found it surprisingly good. The faintest flicker of amusement crossed his face. "If you are going to be here for 2 weeks, we should at least eat well." The conversation stayed light through breakfast, mostly about the estate's history and the endless events Richard hosted. Afterward, Alexander led her through the gardens where the air was cool and fragrant with roses. He listened as she talked about her previous work in hotels and restaurants, asking questions that felt genuine rather than polite. When they reached the glass house, she paused to admire a cluster of orchids. "My mother loved orchids," she said softly, tracing a petal with her fingertip. Alexander watched her for a moment before saying, "My mother loved them too. She used to say they were proof that beauty can grow in the strangest places." Maya glanced at him, surprised by the tenderness in his voice. The day passed with a strange rhythm, neither entirely formal nor entirely casual. At lunch in the clubhouse, Alexander ignored the pointed looks from other members and introduced her simply as Maya Torres, a friend. She noticed the way some smiles turned tight at the word friend, and how Alexander seemed to enjoy their discomfort. In the afternoon, they ended up in the kitchen, where Alexander insisted on helping her bake more waffles. It was a mess from the start, flour dusting the counters, and his shirt batter dripping from the iron, yet somehow they managed to produce a batch that was edible, if uneven. They ate them leaning against the counter, laughing at the uneven shapes. Maya could not remember the last time she had laughed like that. That evening at the charity meeting, Maya sat quietly beside Alexander, listening to discussions about funding for a new community center. When a board member dismissed a proposal to include free cooking classes for underprivileged families, Maya spoke up. "Cooking skills can be the difference between surviving and thriving for a lot of people," she said before realizing all eyes were on her. Alexander backed her immediately, pointing out that food was central to community and dignity. She left the meeting with a small spark of pride, warming her to chest. Over the next few days, their interactions grew easier. Alexander learned she had a habit of humming while she worked, and she learned he could recite entire passages from classic novels, though he claimed to dislike poetry. One rainy afternoon, they were stuck indoors and ended up in the library where Alexander challenged her to a game of chess. She had not played in years, but found herself surprisingly competitive. "You are better than you look," he teased after she trapped his queen. "Better than you expected, you mean?" she replied, arching a brow. They were interrupted by Mrs. Turner bringing tea and a letter for Alexander. His expression darkened as he read it. "My father wants us to attend a gala tomorrow," he said, setting the paper down. Maya hesitated. "Are you sure that is a good idea?" "After what happened last time," he smiled faintly, "that is exactly why it will be interesting." The night of the gala, she wore a navy gown that fit as if it had been tailored for her. Alexander offered his arm without hesitation, guiding her through the throng of elegantly dressed guests. Whispers followed them like a shadow, but Alexander did not flinch. Instead, he introduced her to key figures as though she belonged there. At one point, they slipped away to the balcony where the city lights stretched endlessly. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" she asked, gesturing to the glittering scene inside. He was quiet for a moment. "More than you think. I spent years in Europe trying to avoid it. But it follows me everywhere. And you? Why did you agree to come into this world even for 2 weeks?" She looked out at the skyline. "Because I did not have a choice. My mother needs me to, and because I thought maybe I could handle it." He studied her profile, the way her eyes held both strength and weariness. "You are handling it better than most." The wind carried the faint scent of rain, and for a heartbeat it felt as if the noise inside had vanished. When they returned to the ballroom, Isabella Price intercepted them, her smile sharp. "Alexander, you did not tell me you would be bringing company." Maya forced a polite expression. It was a last-minute decision. Isabella's gaze flicked over Maya's dress, then returned to Alexander. "Some decisions are better thought through." Maya excused herself before she said something that would cause a scene. But Alexander caught her hand briefly, a silent reminder that she was not alone in this. That night, as they walked back through the quiet corridors, Maya realized that somewhere between the waffles and the arguments and the shared silences, she had stopped thinking of this as just an arrangement. The following morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the estate bathed in a pale golden light. Maya found herself in the library again, browsing the lower shelves, for something to occupy the quiet hours before the next scheduled event. Her fingers paused on a leather-bound journal tucked between 2 volumes of corporate law. She hesitated, then slid it free, the faint scent of old paper rising as she opened the cover. Inside were neat, precise entries, each signed with initials that could only belong to Alexander. She skimmed the first few pages and quickly realized they were not business notes but personal reflections. One dated 5 years earlier caught her attention. "Called off the wedding today. Could not marry someone who saw me as a bank account. My father is furious, but I feel strangely free." Maya's breath caught. She had heard whispers at the gala from women who spoke in hushed tones about Alexander's broken engagement, but she had assumed it was just another rumor. She closed the journal gently and replaced it on the shelf just as Alexander entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "I thought you might want this," he said, handing her one. She accepted it, grateful for the warmth against her palms. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said after a moment. He gave a cautious nod. "Why did you call off your wedding?" He did not seem surprised by the question. because I realized I was about to make the same mistake my father wanted me to make again last night, choosing someone for the image rather than the person. She studied his face. That must have been difficult. It was, but not as difficult as living a life built on a lie. He took a sip of his coffee, then asked, "And have you ever come close to marriage?" She laughed without humor. "Once. He left when my mother got sick, said he was not ready for that kind of responsibility." Alexander's expression hardened. "Then he was not worth you." She shrugged, though the memory still stung. "It taught me not to expect much from people." His gaze softened. "Maybe you should expect more." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but the air between them felt different, charged with a new understanding. Later that day, Alexander invited her to join him for a visit to a small bistro in the city, one of the few places he claimed felt real. Over coffee and a shared plate of waffles, he told her about his mother's influence on his life, how she had taught him to question the world and not simply accept what was handed to him. "She died when I was 21, he said quietly. "My father buried himself in work and expected me to do the same." Maya listened without interruption, sensing that this was not something he spoke about often. When they returned to the estate, Maya found herself thinking about the parallels in their lives, both carrying wounds left by people who should have stayed. That night, she decided to return the openness he had shown. She told him about her mother's years working 2 jobs to raise her, about the pride she took in making everything stretch even when it seemed impossible. She spoke of the day the diagnosis came and how she had promised herself she would find a way to give her mother comfort no matter what it cost. Alexander did not interrupt, only reached across the small distance between their chairs and covered her hand with his. "I understand," he said simply. For a moment she believed he truly did. The fragile sense of ease they had built over the past days began to unravel the moment Isabella Price returned to the estate. It was a bright afternoon, the kind of day that made the gardens glow. Yet the air inside felt heavy. Maya was in the kitchen experimenting with a new waffle recipe when the sharp click of heels on marble announced Isabella's arrival. She swept into the room as though she owned it. Her tailored dress immaculate, her smile calculated. Well, I see the rumors were true," she said, letting her gaze travel slowly over Maya. "You are still here." Maya kept her focus on the batter, refusing to rise to the bait. "Just helping with lunch." Isabella's laugh was a soft weapon. "Lunch for Alexander, I presume." She picked up a strawberry from the counter and bit into it daintily. "You do realize this little arrangement will not last." Maya finally met her eyes. "And you are certain it will be you when it ends?" Isabella's smile tightened. "I do not need certainty when I have lineage." Before Maya could respond, Alexander entered the kitchen, pausing when he saw Isabella. "I did not know you were coming," he said, his tone cool. "I thought I would surprise you," she replied, brushing past Maya as if she were invisible. "We have a charity auction tonight. You should be my guest." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I already have plans." Isabella's gaze flicked toward Maya. "Of course you do." She left without another word, but the undercurrent of tension remained long after. That evening, Richard summoned Alexander to his study. "You are making a fool of yourself parading that girl around," he said without preamble. She is not suitable, and you know it. Alexander stayed standing, his hands in his pockets. She is suitable for me. This is not about you, Richard snapped. This is about the Grant legacy, the company, our name. Alexander's voice was steady. Then maybe I do not care about the legacy. Richard's eyes narrowed. If you do not end this by the end of the week, you will no longer have a position at Grant Holdings, and you can forget about your inheritance. When Alexander emerged from the study, Maya was waiting in the hallway. She could tell from his expression that something was wrong, but he only said, "We should talk later." The next day, Isabella made her move. She intercepted Maya in the atrium, her voice low enough to avoid the staff overhearing. "You think he will choose you over everything he has known his whole life." She stepped closer, her perfume cloying. Men like Alexander do not marry maids. They enjoy them until it is inconvenient. Maya felt her cheeks flush with anger, but kept her voice even. Better to be inconvenient than heartless. Isabella's eyes flashed. "We will see." That night, Alexander was quieter than usual, distracted, his answers short. Maya wondered if her presence was becoming a burden, if perhaps Isabella's words had truth in them. The doubt gnawed at her until she could barely sleep. The breaking point came 2 nights later during a formal dinner with several of Richard's business associates. Maya was seated beside Alexander, enduring the polite small talk, when Isabella deliberately brought up a rumor about Alexander considering a merger that would require a strategic marriage. The table laughed lightly at the idea of romance in business, but the look Isabella gave her was anything but light. Maya set down her fork. "Some mergers are worth more when they are built on trust," she said before she could stop herself. Isabella's lips curved in a mock-sweet smile. "And some arrangements are doomed when trust is misplaced." The words hit their mark. Maya excused herself from the table, her pulse pounding. She headed for the kitchen, where she began clearing dishes with more force than necessary. Alexander found her there minutes later. "What happened?" he asked. She shook her head. Maybe this was a mistake. His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you should just do what your father wants. Marry someone like Isabella. Keep your company, keep your legacy." His voice sharpened. "Is that what you think this is about? That I am choosing between you and a business deal?" She met his eyes. "Isn't it?" He stepped closer, but she backed away. "You do not have to explain, I understand." She turned and left before he could answer, retreating to her suite, where she packed her bag with shaking hands. By morning, she was gone, leaving only a note on the bedside table. 2 weeks or not, I cannot be part of a game I do not understand. Alexander stood in the empty room holding the note, the quiet pressing in on him. The house felt colder without her. Alexander spent the hours after her departure in a haze that felt heavier than any boardroom crisis he had ever faced. The suite she had occupied for barely more than a week already felt like an abandoned wing of the house, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway like a ghost. He sat at his desk, staring at the neat stack of contracts that needed his signature. The same documents that would secure a merger his father had been pressuring him to finalize. The pen lay beside them unused. For years he had made decisions with precision, weighing every cost and benefit, never allowing emotions to dictate his course. Yet now the absence of a woman who had entered his life by accident had turned all of that discipline into dust. He rose abruptly, ignoring the blinking light on his phone that signaled unanswered messages from his father. He needed to find her, and he knew sitting here would only let her slip further away. The first place he went was the staffing agency that had sent her to the Grant estate. The receptionist hesitated, but a look from Alexander was enough to make her check the files. She left her position yesterday, the woman said. Something about moving her mother to a facility closer to the waterfront. That was all Alexander needed. He drove through the city streets with the kind of focus usually reserved for high-speed negotiations, scanning addresses until he found the modest two-story building with a sign reading Bayview Assisted Living. He spotted her instantly in the small parking lot, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, her arms full of boxes. She set them down in the trunk of an aging sedan and closed the lid with a soft thud. When she turned and saw him, her expression shifted from surprise to guarded weariness. "You should not be here," she said. "I had to be." He stepped closer until the salty wind off the water caught between them. "I let you walk away without telling you the truth." "And what truth is that?" She asked, her voice low. "That I am finished letting my father dictate my life." She crossed her arms. "That sounds noble, but you and I both know it is not that simple. It is for me. This morning I informed the board that I am resigning as CEO and transferring my shares back to my father." She stared at him as though trying to read his face for signs of exaggeration. "You are telling me you just walked away from the company, the fortune, all of it. I am telling you that none of it matters if it means losing you." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and withdrew a folded document. She hesitated before taking it. The paper cooled beneath her fingers. Her eyes scanned the resignation letter, complete with the date and his signature. It was real. She swallowed hard. "Do you realize what you are giving up?" He shook his head slightly. "I am not giving up anything worth keeping. The company was my father's creation. I kept it running, but it never belonged to me. You do." She opened her mouth to protest, but he pressed on. "I have already found a place near here, a house with a garden, and enough space for your mother to plant whatever she wants. We could move in tomorrow." The words felt impossible, yet the quiet conviction in his tone made her chest tighten. "My mother needs stability," she said, "and she will have it. She will have a home care and the freedom to do what makes her happy. You both will." Maya turned away for a moment, looking out toward the harbor where gulls wheeled over the water. "Why me?" she asked, finally, the words barely audible over the wind. "Because you are the only person who has ever made me want to stay in one place." His answer came without hesitation. "I have spent my life moving from deal to deal, city to city, always thinking the next success would make me feel complete. It never did. Then you walked in, and everything changed." She looked back at him, her eyes searching. "I do not know if this will work," she said. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know I would rather fail with you than succeed without you." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft rush of the tide against the seawall. Slowly she stepped forward until the space between them was gone. The guarded expression she had worn since he arrived softened. "You are serious about this," she said. deadly serious, and if your father never forgives you, then that will be his loss. I have been living for his approval for far too long." She let out a breath that seemed to carry the last of her resistance. "You have a way of making things sound final." "They are." He reached for her hands, warm despite the wind. "Come with me. Let us start something that belongs to us, not to a name on a building or a line in a contract." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "One condition," she said, "you keep making those waffles." His answering smile was the first genuine one he had worn in days. Deal. 2 days later, Maya stood on the porch of a small coastal house, watching her mother inspect the garden with a level of enthusiasm she had not seen in years. The house was painted a soft shade of blue with white trim and wide windows that let in the morning sun. From the porch steps, you could hear the distant crash of waves and smell the salt carried on the breeze. Alexander emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with 3 mugs of coffee and a plate stacked high with fresh waffles. He set them down on the small table between 2 wicker chairs and glanced toward Maya's mother. "She is already planning where the roses will go," he said with a faint smile. "She has not stopped talking about it since we got here," Maya replied. She joined him at the table and accepted a mug. "You did not have to do all of this. I wanted to. I needed you both to have a place that is yours." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching her mother move among the garden beds as if reclaiming a part of her life. After breakfast, Alexander suggested a walk along the beach. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and gulls cried overhead. For the first time in years, Maya felt the weight of constant worry begin to lift. She glanced at Alexander, noticing how different he seemed, without the constant tension that had marked his posture in the city. "You are not looking over your shoulder anymore," she observed. "There is nothing back there I need," he said. "No meetings, no contracts, no board members, just this." He gestured to the horizon where the water met the sky. Later that afternoon, an unfamiliar car pulled into the driveway. Richard Grant stepped out dressed more simply than Maya had ever seen him. He paused before approaching the porch, as though measuring his words. Alexander met him halfway down the path. "I thought you might need directions," Richard said dryly. "I wanted to see for myself what you gave it all up for." Alexander held his ground. "I did not give anything up. I made a choice." Richard's gaze shifted past him to where Maya stood in the doorway. "You must be Maya." She nodded, unsure of what to expect. "My son has caused me more trouble than anyone alive, but it seems this time it might have been for the right reasons," Richard said. There was no warmth in his tone, but there was no condemnation either. He glanced back at Alexander. "I still think you are reckless, but I also think you look different, happier." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "I am." Richard turned to leave but paused. "Your mother would have liked her." The comment hung in the air long after his car disappeared down the road. That evening, Alexander and Maya cooked together in the small kitchen, the windows open to let in the sound of the sea. They worked in easy rhythm, passing ingredients and teasing each other over technique. When the waffles were done, they carried them out to the porch, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Maya's mother joined them, and for the first time in a long while, laughter came easily around the table. Over the next week, they settled into a new routine. Mornings began with coffee and waffles in the garden. Afternoons were spent walking on the beach or visiting the town's small market. Alexander helped Maya's mother plant roses along the fence and built raised beds for vegetables. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading or talking about plans for the future. One night, as the fire crackled and shadows danced across the walls, Alexander turned to Maya. "I know we left a lot behind in the city, but I do not want to go back to who I was before. I want to build something here with you." She studied his face and saw no trace of doubt. "What would we build?" she asked. "Something that helps people," he said. "You talked once about how cooking can give people dignity. We could open a small cafe that offers free classes for anyone who wants to learn." She smiled at the thought. A place with good food and no pretension. A place where people feel welcome. Exactly. It took weeks of planning and calls to suppliers. But soon the outline of their idea began to take shape. Alexander found a vacant storefront near the harbor, and by the end of the month, they had the keys. They painted the walls themselves a warm cream color, hung shelves for cookbooks, and filled the space with second-hand tables polished until they gleamed. Maya tested waffle recipes, experimenting with flavors, until they found the ones that made them both smile. On the cafe's opening day, the townspeople arrived curious about the new place run by a man who had once been a millionaire CEO and a woman who had worked as a maid. Some came for the food, others for the free classes advertised on the chalkboard outside. The first class was small, just 5 people, but the air buzzed with energy as they learned to mix batter and pour it into the irons. Alexander moved among them with quiet encouragement, while Maya showed them how to judge the perfect golden brown. When the last waffle was served and the last customer had gone, Alexander turned to Maya. "This is ours," he said, "and it is just the beginning." She reached for his hand and held it tight. Months passed and the cafe became more than just a place to eat. It turned into a hub where fishermen stopped for coffee. Before dawn, children came after school to help in the kitchen and neighbors dropped by. Simply to sit at the long communal table and share stories. Maya's mother often sat near the front window, knitting and greeting everyone who walked in. Her health steadier now, with the quiet life and fresh sea air. Alexander moved with an ease that would have shocked those who once knew him in the corporate world. He wore rolled-up sleeves instead of tailored suits, his watch replaced by a simple leather band, his schedule dictated not by board meetings but by deliveries of flour and fresh berries. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of pink and lavender, he and Maya locked up the cafe and walked hand in hand along the harbor. The air was cool and smelled faintly of salt and wood smoke. "You know, I never imagined my life would look like this," he said. "Neither did I," she replied, "but I would not change it." He glanced at her profile, silhouetted against the fading light. "Do you miss it? The city, the money, the power?" She thought for a moment. "I miss the certainty of a steady paycheck, but not the cost that came with it." "And you, I miss nothing," he said without hesitation. "I have learned that the most valuable thing I can own is my time and who I spend it with." They stopped at the edge of the pier where the water lapped softly against the pilings. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the surface. Maya rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love was about being rescued," she said quietly. "But now I think it is about choosing someone every day, even when it is hard." Alexander turned to face her. "Then I choose you." Every day. She smiled at the simplicity of it. They stood there for a long time, the night settling around them like a promise. Back at the cafe, the waffle irons cooled in the dark kitchen, the scent of sugar and butter still lingering. In the morning, the doors would open again, to laughter and the clatter of plates, to strangers becoming friends, and to the quiet, steady life they had built together. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are not about grand gestures or perfect beginnings, but about two people deciding to stay and to make something new from what they have. For Alexander and Maya, home was no longer a place they had to inherit or defend. It was the choice they made together every single day.